Namaste, and welcome to Insight UK's new podcast series, where we interview Indic Sanatanis and those who've embraced Hindu Dharma but from a non-Sanatani or Indic background. We will talk to them about their lives as Sanatanis or their journeys into Sanatana Dharma and how their lives have changed as a result. For only our second podcast, we are very delighted to welcome Shawn Binda, who runs the very popular YouTube channel Hindu Lifestyle Official. He is a Canadian-born Hindu of Indo-Caribbean heritage and provides a unique perspective on what it means to be a Hindu. According to his channel, he provides insightful discussions on Hindu spirituality to in-depth explorations of ancient scriptures. It's dedicated to unraveling the essence of Hinduism in the 21st century from the perspective of a Hindu growing up outside of India, as well as dispelling myths and falsehoods about Hinduism and tackling Hinduphobia. Well, what an honor to have you with us, Shawn G. Namaste and Swagatham. A very warm welcome to the podcast.
Namaste. Thank you for having me as well. I am honored to be part of your podcast series. I do have to be honest, this is all very new to me in the sense that when I started making videos, I never really thought about the reach. And we could probably get into all of that later as to why I started. But yeah, I am deeply honored to for when the request came to join in, and just as how you feel the same way about me, the feeling is mutual by all means.
Oh, well, that is so sweet. Thank you so much. Yes, we will be getting into why you decided to create your channel and what your motivations were. But before we do get into that, could you just tell us a little bit more about yourself? There may be some viewers who they might not even have a clue who you are. Or there may be some who do, but just aren't really aware of your background. So just tell us a bit about yourself, your background, and how is it, because this is what your content specializes in, this is your perspective. How is it to grow up as a Hindu, as a person of Indian origin as well, outside of India?
Yeah, so my name is Shawn. I was born and raised in Canada. My parents migrated from Trinidad in the 70s, and there was a large migration of people like my parents, so Hindus that left the Caribbean and they came to settle in the Toronto area. I am one of three siblings. I have an older brother and a younger sister, and that is sort of my origin story, if you will. Now, part of growing up, my family was heavily involved within the Hindu community here in the Toronto area. And my entry into Hinduism first started with my father, who was attending various mandirs and gatherings here. And there came a point in his life where he decided that he needed to branch off, and he became the founding member of the Devi Mandir, which is a mandir that's about 30 minutes east of the city of Toronto. And I would say that me being Hindu is largely influenced by my involvement in the mandir atmosphere. I have mentioned in some of my other videos that I've never been to India yet. So my outlook on Hinduism is probably different than a lot of other Hindus that have largely grown up in India, or maybe a generation where their parents are from India. But for me, my great grandfather was from India, who then part of the whole indentureship, which we can get to later. And so it's a series of migrations. If you want to call me a Hindu twice removed, a series of migrations, but through all of that, somehow the Hindu identity persisted, and that is a little bit about myself. I am married. I have two young kids as well, so it's busy. Life is
I
busy.
can imagine. Wow, I mean, that's really fascinating to know about your family history as well, that there was all these migrations and that your father has set up a mandir all those years back. That's really interesting to know. And I think I would say once a Hindu, always a Hindu. And I guess everyone in some way is a Hindu or Sanatani as well. So that's how I see things. I'm not sure if you do. I think you do.
Yes, I do.
Probably. So you talked a little bit about your background. So how was it then in your perspective, from, I think, maybe from what you've learned from family, to to grow up or to be a Hindu in Caribbean countries. Would you say that there's a major difference to being a Hindu there in those places as opposed to Western countries like the UK, Canada, or in Europe, US, etc.? What do you think?
I, yeah, it's a complex question. I don't think there's a single answer, but how I like to see it is that the Indians left India, and this year made 186 years since Indians left, and the first boat that left landed in 1838 in Guyana. And then the where my parents are from, that the first migrants came in 1845. So the way I always like to frame these discussions is that take India at that time and take Hindus that were growing up in remote villages. There wasn't this whole urban environment, and you take that and you take a little snapshot of what their life was like, and you bring that over into a foreign land, and that is basically the Hinduism, if you want to call it that. That is the Hinduism that stayed with us. So there's a lot of layers to unpack there. A lot of us, we were very poor. So what is it that we had to hold on to? And the stories that have come out recently about indentureship is that it wasn't this, oh yeah, they left for a better life and all this kind of stuff, but the British needed workers in the plantation fields for sugar and all those things to support their industry. And the people that came were laborers. That was their number one job. Slavery had ended, and then they needed workers to actually look after the sugarcane plantation. So that was the primary reason why they were brought. And that sort of mentality is what has passed down, this hardworking mentality. And I remember growing up here is that you don't know what you don't know. And for us, being Hindu as a young kid from a West Indian background and Indo-Caribbean background, is that largely how we practice Hinduism was largely singing bhajans, bhakti, very simple pujas, very, very like simple things like that. And of course, daily pujas in your home. And I remember visiting Trinidad, and my nanny and Nana, they would have their altar room, and every morning they would wake up and they would offer water to the Shivlingam. And this is all that Hindu life was. But when my parents left and then they established here in the city of Toronto, there was a lot more exposure to the wider Hindu world. And that is where my eyes opened up to the more complex pujas and rituals like abhishekams and those things that came from the Caribbean were never open to. So there's pros and cons to both. What I have found in more recent years is that a lot of us from the West Indian community, we still tend to keep within our box and not venture out. Then you have people like myself that have grown up in a city like Toronto, where you have so much exposure to a variety of Hindu practices that it opens up your eyes, and we see it as a learning experience. Is that how is it that we can learn from different communities? So my entry was primarily that, and for any West Indian child growing up, music is by far the number one thing. Whether you learn to sing, you learn to play any musical instrument, or even if you learn to dance, that is your entry. And I would say that is what every parent tries to start. I would now add, now that I'm a little bit older, is that can't be where you stop. That is your entry. And now that we are living in a more global Hindu environment, there are things that we need to be doing more of. So that is, in a little 2 or 3 minute spiel. Yeah.
No, that was beautifully explained, and I think any NRI out there will truly relate to your experiences. I mean, myself included, because our families have migrated, and there's intergenerational um, things and ways that our parents and our grandparents tried to hold on to our cultures. And what you've just said just now really resonated with me, and I'm sure it's going to be the same for others. I like that you said that music, art, culture essentially is like an entry point, but it's not. I like that. It's not where you stop. It's just where you start. So I love that. I love hearing that. Well, thank you for that. Now, so we've spoken a bit more about your background and your family. So now we come to your content, what you do and why you do what you do. And for those who are especially unfamiliar with your content or who you are, could you tell us why you did set up your channel? And if you could also answer this as well, in addition to that, what did you feel that your channel specifically would provide in terms of the content in comparison to others? Because there are many out there, channels that are about Hinduism, about our customs, why we do what we do, um, dispelling myths and falsehoods about, about various things, or tackling Hinduphobia. So why did you set up your channel? And how did you feel that your channel would be different in any way, if that's indeed what you did feel?
Very, very good question. So let me rewind to about 2012 or so. And I was involved in the Munder environment. As I said, like that's where I grew up because of my parents' involvement. And I got to a point in my life where they asked me to be part of the board of directors that manage, and I was the youngest member of the board that was elected. And from that point, as I got a little bit older, and not that I'm very old right now, but but as I got older, um, there was an opportunity at the Munder that I attended to become a teacher in our Balvikas classes. And up until that point, my interest into Hinduism wasn't very academic, and I would be the first to admit that. I participated. I was involved in running events and managing functions and trying and in youth groups. We started Hindu youth groups here, but from the teaching perspective, that wasn't something that was my focus. I was involved in running of Hindu youth conferences, but that was more of like, running it, but not actively sort of teaching it. And in 2012, I had the opportunity where I became the teacher of our Balvikas class. And the way our classes were structured is that we had split all the kids that were attending into 3 age groups. So we had from the ages of 5 to about 7, and then a second group was from 8 to 11 or 12. And then I was tasked with teaching kids that are starting into high school all the way up to university. And that spawned a whole series of changes in my life. Is that because I was involved in the Munder atmosphere, a lot of people just looked up to me as that, hey, you're a young guy, you were born here, you can relate to all of these young kids now growing up. So maybe this is something that you can do. And I said, okay, let me see what I can do. And that was what kind of led me deeper down into this path of figuring out how to explain Hinduism to another generation of Hindus growing up. And I was always involved in teaching. I teach music, so that aspect was always there in my life. But the teaching of Hinduism presented a unique challenge in that, in order to explain something, you have to know it very well. And that because of all of that, I just started purchasing so much reading material. And of course, the internet was there. So I used the internet a lot of just reading and watching. And what I found out over the course of those years, from about 2012 to about 2015, is that I was able to sort of connect on a level of the kids growing up and not make it seem like Hinduism was this foreign thing that your parents told you to do. And that you just listen to whatever they had to say because you're a young kid. This is what you do. You obey your parents. They say go to the temple and do arti. This is what you do. So it was the kids in my first class that urged me on to saying, hey, Shawn, like, you know what, we really enjoy your classes. And these are kids that are 14, 15 years old. They're like, why don't you do something more with what you have? So I'm like, what are you talking about? You want me to do something more? They're like, you can make a website or just something. I'm like, there's so many websites out there. Like how is it going to be different? And then I started thinking about it, and that's when I realized that maybe I should do something that brings my personality and the way that I explain things to a more broader audience. And I said, let me just take some of my lessons that I did and make YouTube videos. And I remember talking to my wife about it, and she's like, are you going to be a YouTube star? And then I'm like, I don't even know what it means to be a YouTube star. I'm teaching all this stuff. Let's just put it up and let me see what I could do. So my first few videos was basically I had a webcam and I made sure that I combed my hair and I shaved and I did all of these things. And I said, let's talk about Hinduism. And if you go back and you look at some of my first videos, that was basically all that it was, is that like was trying to talk about Hinduism in a way that didn't make it seem foreign. And from that point is where I started delving more into what my perspective is. And you had asked me, is that what makes my perspective different? And this actually is a very good question, because as I told a lot of people at the time, I'm like, there are so many videos on YouTube where people can learn from that, but most of what I was seeing was either people on their phones just recording themselves talking. And in that day and age, like 2016 was when I started, like you also needed to grab people's attention. And I also like to think of where I sit in terms of Venn diagrams, is that you have one circle where you have your pundits and your swamis and your academic experts, people that know Hinduism. And then you have people that are outside of that circle that would never make the connection as that maybe I should be listening to these people, what they have to say. And I sort of sit in the middle where
Mhm.
that I have no problems listening to swamis talk for 2 hours because that is my nature. But I realize that there's people who are Hindu that identify as a Hindu that will never make that jump. And that's where I think my voice slots in, is that if I can open the eyes of people that are Hindu that want to learn more, and if I can be that bridge that connects them to the experts and the pundits and the swamis and all of that, then my job here is done. That's 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 how I feel. And I tell people openly, I am not a pundit, I am not a swami. I am just a regular Hindu guy. I have kids. I have to raise my kids as Hindu. And yes, I've read. Yes, I learn. But at a minimum, if you want to listen to what I have to say, then do that and know that your journey as a Hindu is only going to grow from this point onwards.
Oh, that was really lovely that you're the bridge between young Hindus and these experts, or to the wider kind of vast repository of knowledge there. I love that. And I like when you talked about the fact that in this day and age, more and more people are, well, more and more young Hindus are seeing our way of life and our culture as just something that's, that the parents tell them to follow. It's become more ritualistic and nothing is really explained, and the beauty and all these nuances are not really touched upon. And then that's why they become rather disillusioned, which is where the problem lies, which is where people like you come in. I really like that. So speaking of, well, disillusionment, alienation. Did your journey as, I would say, a fully fledged Sanatani YouTuber, did that alienate others, people in your life or professional contacts or attract criticism? Or was it the opposite? Did you find that people were celebrating you for what you were doing and what you're aiming with?
I would say that the community that I was raised in, by far, people were celebrating. And that I think the support system that I have around me and the community that I'm a part of, they played a huge role in providing feedback and saying that, hey, what you're doing is a good thing. Please continue it. In terms of the alienation, that's an interesting question, and I find that this part comes up with people that are outside of the Hindu community, whether it be coworkers or friends or people that are not in the Hindu community. And I would say for the most part, when like like when I go into work, I work in a hospital. I don't go out and say, "Hey, I'm a Hindu YouTuber." It's just that if it comes up in conversation and some of my close peers know that I do it, and it does come up, people do ask me, "So why is it that you're on YouTube?" And I just say, over and over, is that it's about Hindu education, that I want to make sure that the next generation is learning and not forgetting their roots. Generally, I would say 99% of it has been very positive. And what I also find with younger people today is that there is a desire to connect to something deeper. And the challenges that I see within our community, and I mean this more as a global Hindu community, is that the connection points to actually become a better Hindu are slowly being lost. And there are probably a lot of factors that play into that. Growing up here in the West, and you can attest to this, is that there are so much other distractions that are in your life, and now with the rise of all these ideologies about everything and consumerism, and young people need to ground themselves and root themselves, and I think Hinduism has a role to play. The question is, how do you get that message out there? And I think that is the hardest part. And I had started posting videos in 2016, and I stopped in 2018 because my first son was born, COVID hit, and then I had another son, and so things just, it was hard. And even now when I started back, so I started back in October of last year, and even now it's hard, it's tough, but I love to do it and I want to do it. So yeah.
Well, we're glad that you are doing it, even though it's so hard, and kudos to you. I'm sure it's incredibly busy, but we're really glad that you're still doing what you do. Keep on doing it. And I'm sure that being part of this podcast now will give you some encouragement and some inspiration just to keep going. So don't stop. Um, so coming to more about your channel, as we know, and as viewers will get to know if they haven't come across it before, it is a vast repository of content aiming to educate people about the Hindu faith, as you've said, and why we do what we do, etc. Um, what would you say your demographic is? Is it aimed at non-Indians slash non-Hindus, or Hindus slash Indians themselves? And I guess another part of this is that, do you feel that a lot of Hindus, at least certainly in this day and age today, don't know much about their own faith? They don't know why we do these certain little things. They've grown up doing that. We talked about this before, that some parts of the culture have become ritualistic, and in that in turn has become rather simplistic. They don't get why we do what we do, and that just leads to a detachment or even an aversion to it. If they don't understand something, why would they bother learning about it? So do you find that a lot of people like us just don't know that much about their own faith, and when they come across your work, they just think, oh wow, I didn't know this. Why didn't I even know this before? Why didn't my parents ever tell me? What do you think?
Yeah, so let me break this down from a personal perspective. So one of the questions that I often get asked is, you are from the Caribbean. Your ancestors left, 180 some years ago, but you are now growing up in Toronto, but yet you're still Hindu. So that is always met with amazement. Um, the other part, the flip side of that, is that there are also a lot of Indians outside of India that are not even aware of the history of the migrations of my ancestors. And all of this focuses, when I have these conversations, is that comes back to what you had asked me, is that a lot of people don't know. And I was listening to another podcast a few weeks ago where it was a person who was saying that when they were growing up in India, and when they came to America is when they realized that now they have to start explaining things. So you could imagine growing up in a culture where when you open your door and you walk out, everything is Hindu. There's no need to explain it. There's no need for it, right?
Mm,
Because that's what it is. So
absolutely.
when you come and you now establish a life outside of India, or now I would even argue outside of places like Trinidad or Guyana, or these places where there's a larger Hindu population, you are now forced to have to think about why is it that you do these things. And I would say that part of that is we ourselves don't reflect a lot on our practices, whereas if you look at other faith groups, they have Bible study groups. They have, groups that go and study the Quran. But for us as young Hindus growing up, there's no official classes. And I think this is the problem that a lot of us have. And the demographic that I am trying to reach is certainly not the non-Hindu. I think a non-Hindu that comes to Hinduism, they come from a totally different perspective. And certainly my videos have appealed to them as well. But I believe my demographic are the Hindus that identify as a Hindu and realize that they don't know enough, or that they don't know the connections that need to be made in order to be a better Hindu. Something as simple as daily pujas in your home. You ask any Hindu that is walking the street, do you do any type of daily puja or daily sadhana or anything like that at your home? The answer is probably going to be no. They might just go in and they look at their murtis and various images, and they just do a simple pranam, and they say and they chant om, and then they go about their day. But when you talk about serious practices, there's a lot of Hindus that don't even do that. And that's only scratching the surface. Then you start getting into the deeper philosophies and everything else. And now you've lost a lot of the Hindus that are growing up. So I would say that the demographic that I appeal to is those that identify as a Hindu that may be doing certain things, but to make the connections as to and be empowered to answer the questions, why do we do these things? That is where I hope my channel can help sort of be that bridge. The flip side of this, though, and this is something that I've come to realize myself now as I've gotten a little bit older, is that there comes a point where you're asking why, and why is only meant to satisfy your own intellectual ego. And I think that a lot of times Hindus want to know why they do everything that they do, and I think it's great. Like, yes, you asked, but there comes a point where if all you're doing is asking why, and internally you're not doing anything to spiritually change yourself, then you're always going to be stuck in this loop. And I think that Hindus as a whole, they want to learn more, and I hope that my YouTube channel can just be that sort of like in between space where they tune into me, and then they just like 5 6 6 minutes long, and then something just clicks in their head that, hey, what this guy said is actually right. Maybe I should go look into this more. That I think is what the aim is.
That's really good. I mean, I certainly, for one, I'm going to keep listening to your stuff and just trying to learn more and spiritually change myself as well. That's a really interesting point. And yeah, you're right. You'll find that the average Hindu, especially in Western countries, may not necessarily be just doing their daily practice in that profound spiritual way that they've seen that the older generations of the family um, uh, conduct. So yeah, that's very interesting. Um, so yeah, you've talked about what what there is lacking in the current Hindu community today. That there's not that sort of cohesion. I like that you made the comparison with those who there's a lot of, Bible study groups out there, but you don't find that same level of zeal or enthusiasm for a similar thing for the Hindu or the Sanatani practice. So just how do you feel personally as a Hindu or a Sanatani when you come across other Hindus themselves that not only don't understand the basic principles of their own faith or way of life, um, but who actively propagate Hindu-phobic content or misunderstandings. And they clearly demonstrate that lack of awareness about their way of life. So there's on the one hand, there are people that identify as Hindu and they'll say that they're proud Hindus, but they don't really sort of know much about their own faith. But they might want to change themselves. But on the other side, you will have people who are they are supposedly openly Hindu, but they just don't do anything to educate themselves, the people around them, and they actively disseminate um, Hindu-phobic statements and content. How do you feel about that personally?
Personally, it's a very frustrating thing. I remembered growing up, my father and myself, we would be like looking around, and our first, like, one thing that I learned from my dad was that he would always go and ask people, why aren't you bringing your kids to the temple? Why? So he would ask his own peers that. So people of my generation is that, well, why aren't you bringing your kids? And the number one answer you would get is that, oh, well, my kids have school and they have this and they have that and they have that. The problem that I face, and what my frustration is that, as you mentioned, is that people that identify as Hindus and then want to talk about things that are Hindu in nature from the wrong interpretation of what they know. So that in itself is not something that upsets me. What upsets me is that when they dig their heels in and want to say that they're right, that what they're saying is right, and that you are wrong in trying to correct them. And the 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 problem that I see is that people like that, you're never going to change what they think. And you could spend hours and hours and hours in trying to change the mindset of someone like that, and it's probably not going to work. What I find works best is to create an environment that is more open for questioning. And what I try to tell people right now is that there's going to be people that you meet in your life that are at different levels in their spiritual journey. So you might be someone that only attends Monday maybe once or twice a year, and you don't do anything after that. So are you going to go now tell this person that, well, you are a bad Hindu because you are not going to the temple every single day? And I said, like, you have to understand that everyone's on whatever path that they're on. Uh, all you can do is focus on yourself, number one. Change yourself first, meaning that, are you doing everything that you can do? And I meet Hindus all the time that come from a level where they feel that everything that they're doing is top notch, but what they fail to realize is that they've also developed their own sort of spiritual ego. And what we need to be doing as a community is figuring out, how can we get more people into our fold? And it's a challenge that I think every community is going to face, and more so when we have other generations of Hindu that are now being born into, say, Canada or the US or the UK, where they are so far removed from India that you need to figure out how to bring them in. And if you don't figure that part out, there's no amount of attacking the other side is actually going to change that. And as the saying goes, you attract more bees with honey than you do with anything else. How do you get that message across, though? And I find that because Hindus feel well, not feel, because Hinduism has been under attack for so long, there is always this feel that Hindus have to be on the offensive. And there's part of that statement that is true, but I think within our own community, we have to do a little bit of self-reflecting to figure out, what is it that I can do to actually bring more people in.
That was really well explained. Thank you so much. You said that people who are born in places like Canada, or I would say the US and those countries, are far removed from India. And I like that you said that, that they need that, connection between the two. And I would say that part of it is for the ones that demonstrate such a lack of understanding about their way of life, but then who constantly declare or proclaim that they're right, that they have the moral high ground. I suppose that also when you grow up in other countries outside of the motherland, the country's specific education system and what they learn and what they glean from others around them will have such a huge impact because they'll believe what their textbooks would say, even if they're completely distorting the truth rather than what their own families might say, or their, the wider community. So that brings me to my next question. How is Hinduism or Sanatana Dharma taught in Canada's education system? And also, how is it covered in the media? Because the media can play a really big role. And depending on where you live, depending on what news outlets you subscribe to, although I would say nowadays it's all over anyway, and you don't really have a choice and you just see what's in front of you. How is it taught in your country's education system? And how is it covered in your media over there?
So there's probably two or three points that I want to touch upon here. Now that I have young kids, my eldest is will be 6 in the summer, and what I've noticed in his kindergarten classes is that the teachers are actually very open to actually celebrating any type of religious festival or holiday. So what we have done, and what my wife, she sees the opportunity to actually say, okay, Diwali is coming up. We approached our teacher, and she said, are you open to us coming in and explaining to the kids, at a level that is appropriate to them, what Diwali is. So we have done that. We also did the same for Holi. So that, I think, is the first step, is that parents can play an active role in their child's lives if you are part of the public school system here in Ontario. But on a more systematic level, the way Hinduism is taught in schools is, number one, it's not taught in the elementary schools. And I think the first exposure is in the high school level, where it is mandatory that kids, not mandatory, it is recommended that kids participate in a world religions course. Pros and cons to studying Hinduism from a book. And because of my experience teaching kids, I would frequently get asked, my teacher said X, Y, and Z. And I said, yes, they're incorrect. And the hard part is changing that, because that is on a systemic level now, where the textbooks that train the teachers are largely framed by professors and quote unquote scholars that are non-Hindu. So that is now going to frame the opinion of the teachers of how to portray Hinduism in an academic environment. And like just a few months ago, I have a teenage girl. She is 16, and she's doing this world religions course. And her mom came to me after Monday one day saying, my daughter's teacher said that Hinduism is all about caste. And I said, yes, yes. I said, are they? Yeah. So, like, thing is that the speaking points that are being taught at the school level hasn't changed in 20 years, despite all or probably even longer than that. The speaking points are the same, which is why it's important that temples or Hindu organizations take it upon themselves to actually educate Hindus themselves, because you don't want your son or daughter's first exposure to learning about Hinduism coming from someone that's an academic. I know within the city of Toronto, and that school board and all the surrounding school boards, is that there are now Hindu groups that are starting to open their eyes as to what is being taught, and they are now actively trying to be involved at the curriculum level as to, how is it that you want Hinduism portrayed. And if you followed any of the textbook controversy that happened in California, it's a big issue that I think every Hindu must face. These are issues that need broad community support, and it's not something that, like myself, that I am going to change. But I think the first change that has to happen, number one, is that parents need to be involved in their kids' learning to actually know what is being taught, and also be empowered to actually answer why this is incorrect. Because if parents don't feel that empowerment, they're just going to say, oh, just listen to whatever the teacher's saying, don't worry about it, don't kick up a fuss, which is a problem. So I think those are the things that have to happen from a university standpoint. Now, well, that is a whole can of worms right there, and I don't think that will change anytime soon, because the people that are part of the academic Hindu environment have been put in place from years of studying under people that formed, the head of the cabal, if you will, and that is not going to change. I know that a lot of work has been done in the last 10 to 15 years to actually bring up more Hindu indigenous scholars to actually start, counteracting a lot of these narratives that are set, which is another reason for the channel, is that, trying to dispel the myths that actually come up in the discourse on academic Hinduism. And like, just personal feedback that I received was that, there are a huge number of Hindus that wouldn't go and listen to like academic Hindus counteract or try to argue against all the narratives that are being set, because this is at a different level that your average Hindu is actually not going to follow. And here I step in, where I listen to all of that and try to like pare it down so that at least there is someone that relates to this other subset of Hindus that can actually like talk about these things, and at least provide an answer as to what they're learning in school is actually incorrect.
I think you should set up your own university course. Your own school to kind of
Yeah,
counter all that. I think you'll be
you
more
know the
successful.
the funny thing is that there are some parents that actually approached me at the temple asking if I would ever sort of set up anything like that. And I said, if I had another life, then probably. But there's only so much bandwidth that everyone has to actually do these things.
Oh well, you never know. You never know the future. And I think your content can also, I mean, you said that your demographic isn't for, well, is more for the Hindus who want to educate themselves. But I mean, from what I've seen, I think it could go further and educate those who are not Hindu, because the way you explain it, and views, this is like a, a real encouragement to see his content. The way you do explain it, and your graphics and your style, I think it will relate to everyone. And I think it will go as far as to educate pretty much anyone. So see, you never know the future. You never know. Well, thank you for explaining what Hinduism is taught in your country's education system. So just going from that to the wider Canadian Hindu community, these days, when we do think about them, I think it's probably safe to say that we automatically, sadly, think about the threats that are posed to them, particularly by the Khalisani terror elements, and I suppose what your government is kind of espousing. And when we talk about the Khalisani issues, I think we should also just remind our viewers and just stress that that's not and never has been a tenet of the Sikh faith and the way of life. So what do you think about the wider Canadian Hindu community? Would you say that they're facing more Hinduphobia and Hindumissia now than ever? Are you seeing this massive shift, and are you potentially worried?
So to answer your question point blank, yes, I think the Hindu environment in Canada has certainly shifted. from what I remember growing up. And the government has not played the role that it should have played in squashing all of these type of elements that are festering in our society here. Luckily, personally, myself, I haven't had to face any type of anti-Hindu protests by Khalistanis, but there are mandirs that are located in Toronto or in the outskirts that have had their walls spray painted. And there are people that have protested out west in Vancouver, and they had blocked entry of Hindus going into their temple. And I remember, like, when I saw some of these videos, like, how would I react if this was me? That I want to attend, to attend my mandir, and I'm driving in, and now there's protesters blocking me, and they're talking about the Khalistani movement and about this and that, and I'm looking at them, and like this is all just playing in my head. I'm like, here I am as a Hindu born in Canada. My parents are from Trinidad, and it was my great 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 grandfather that came from India. How is your protest apply to me?
Mm.
And this is where that this element in the society has been given life by our government, which is unfortunate because there are so many Sikhs, as you rightfully said, is that so many Sikhs come to our mandir as well, and they come darshan. They don't see themselves as being this like separate state, like and growing up in India, what I've learned from members of our community is that these are all brothers and sisters of the Hindu faith. But this element has been allowed to fester, and it's unfortunate that our liberal government here has actually continued to allow these elements growth simply because they want the votes. And as someone that I have always tried to steer clear of politics in my YouTube channel, but unfortunately, my next video that I'm working on is about the intersection of Hinduism and politics. Is that sometimes like you just have to like face it head on and call a spade a spade. And I think what needs to happen is that Hindus themselves need to be more assertive. We need to be more involved on an advocacy level. There has been a lot of work from the early 70s here in Canada where to build mandirs and to build like facilities and all of that. Great. There are institutions that are in place here. We don't need much of that anymore. What we need now is funding for advocacy groups, funding for education, and we also need funding for groups that are focused on Hindu media, because right now that space is empty.
Mm.
And this is a problem that I see, that here I am, just a sole YouTuber, when if all of our Hindu brother and sisters can actually pool their money together, there is no reason why like we can't be creating our own type of like media network to actually put forward the proper view of what it means to be a Hindu. And I know that I kind of branched all over the place, but I do see a lot of these issues intertwined. Is that the Hindu phobic elements that are part of the Khalistani movement need to be squashed, because we are both brothers and sisters, part of a larger dharmic family, and I don't see it any other way. And it's unfortunate because I did one video where I this was back in 2017, and I was talking about the Raksha Bandhan, and our leader of the opposition, he's a Sikh, and he posted this Hindu phobic comment about how, like, the Raksha that a sister ties on her brother is, I forgot, it's sexist. It's something along those lines.
I've heard that
So,
before.
right. So I did a video talking about it, and I made no mention of the fact, that he was Sikh or like anything like that. But in my comments, what ended up happening is that everyone saw that as me attacking Sikhs. And it had nothing to, and then a whole bunch of Khalistanis flooded the comment section to the point where I actually had to switch off the comments.
my
And I
gosh.
only reopened it afterwards. And I was actually looking at it just this past week because I wanted to see what was the video that received the more dislikes. And it was that video. And here I am just trying to like dispel these myths about calling Hindu traditions sexist or anything like that. But here you have elements of a society that are just seeing it as that, oh, you're a Hindu, so automatically everything that you do is sexist by nature, which was one of the comments.
Oh, well, I think we can, we're all glad to say that, to hear that you were able to just block that out and you combated it and you fought it, which is just all the more commendable. And I guess that just brings to my final question in that, obviously Hinduphobia is exists in all walks of life and in different countries as well. It's not just confined to Canada or to North America. Um, and sometimes it can be so outlandish and just so brazen, but in other ways it can be very insidious and subtle in a way. This sort of perverted kind of subtleness of it. Um, and I guess my last question would be that just what do you think about NRIs like us facing Hinduphobia all over the world? And what can we do, if anything, and if we just have to take that first step of fighting for our way of life and just standing up for our way of life and our culture and just talking about the truth and only the truth. What do you how would you what do you feel about that?
The one challenge that Hindus need to address is their lack of protest. And the modern, if you want to call it a battlefield when it comes to Hinduism, is of course on social media. And there is where I think, I've there are a lot of young Hindus that identify as a Hindu, great. But when it comes to actually protesting against anything that is Hindu phobic, they tend to shy away from it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Why is that?
Why is that?
Why is that? What is it internally within themselves that they feel that they can't speak for themselves? If we address that, then a lot of these things would stop. And I haven't pinned down what it is. It could just be, history of just being oppressed by so many invasions into India, and then colonization, and then all of these things. But the ability to stand up for yourself and be an advocate for Hinduism is not something people do. And right now, in the current political climate, like I've been labeled as a Modi fanboy, I've been labeled as an RSS stooge, I've been labeled as a Hindu nationalist, like all of these things. And this is not from outsiders. This is people from within my own Indo-Caribbean community calling me this because they themselves have internalized, that a strong Hindu is not something that we should be. So the first step is trying to figure out within yourself what is holding you back from sharing a story about how Hindus were attacked in Pakistan. Like, why is it that you don't share that? Why is it that you don't talk about all the famines that happened in India under the British rule? But of course, you'll share about stuff that's happening elsewhere in the world.
Exactly.
So the first step to battling Hindu phobia is creating an inner strength that gives you that power to actually post these things. Something that happened just recently in Trinidad. There was a mandir that was attacked, and all the murtis were broken. So you're watching this now, and there was an interview by the president, and she was saying how like everyone was just shell shocked, is that they can't understand how is it someone entered into the temple, and how is it that they broke the murtis and they shattered everything. What needed to happen there was protest within their own country. But what I ended up seeing, of course, was just that, okay, this is what happened. We need to get the authorities involved. But there wasn't that outrage that needed to happen. And this doesn't mean that like you go in now you attack other places of worship, but just that indignation of what happened. I didn't think that was there. And you compare this, that if this was another place of worship and this happened, you would have seen people on the streets,
Mm.
right? You would have seen people on the streets. But for a Hindu, it's still this attitude, oh, why is this happening to us for? What did we do to deserve this? And I think we as Hindus now need to kind of like dig our heels in the ground and be an assertive Hindu. And those two words have never been paired, an assertive Hindu. And I think if we can do that, that is the first step to battling Hindu phobia.
That's brilliant. What would you say though, if a Hindu feels like they're going that if they speak up, they might be blacklisted? Because I think it's also fair to say in this political climate that if you say something against a certain community, if you talk about something that even though it's true to you and your community, but it happens to involve another community, if you know what I mean, that you're going to be labeled as something phobic. And if you're going to be blacklisted, you're going to be shunned, you're going to be ostracized, you could be fired, you could be, there could be all these consequences. For some, I think there could be that real fear that if they speak up, they're going to be labeled this. And that label is so adhesive, it will just stay with them forever. Um, in what way would you advise people who are afraid in that sense?
So I have been called that. And I think my advice to that, so number one, I think everyone certainly has to look out for themselves, because if it's your job, if it's your career or anything like that, is that like the last thing I want you to do is say, hey, Shawn said to say this, and this, and now I lost my job. So no, that is not what I'm saying. There are ways that you can talk about these things in an open environment. And I think that's what's lacking right now. So that's not to say that you go on social media and you make all these points and you make all these posts attacking another community. But if there is something that you feel strongly about, then you need to set up an open environment where you can express these views. And that is not what's happening. Is that the fear of being labeled a certain remark is what's preventing us from actually advocating for Hindu rights. And it just goes to show you that the game now is not like a physical battle. It's actually a battle with language. It's a mental battle that we have to face, and it's the environment that this generation that's growing up in now has to take on. And it's not easy. I participated in a conference hosted by the University of Toronto and all the Hindu student councils within the Toronto area. And I got to hear some of the experience of the students trying to actually just host Hindu events. And the amount of roadblocks that they faced, it just blew my mind. Like it literally blew my mind, because the fact that they had to face all of these challenges makes me wonder, like why would a Hindu student even want to do anything like this? But as a group, we are stronger than we think. The problem is that we're all into these little pockets that we stay within, and the Caribbean Hindu community is guilty of this as well. I have yet to meet, well, there are probably a handful of West Indian Hindus like myself that advocate for Hindus worldwide. The majority of them feel that like this doesn't apply to them, because that is not their community, because they identify as a West Indian. But I think conversations that we're having here, that is necessary, so that we see ourselves not just as, hey, I'm a UK Hindu, I am a Canadian Hindu, I'm a West Indian Hindu, I'm an American Hindu, I'm a Hindu from Fiji, but if we see ourselves as a global Hindu community, then we're going to start realizing that our strength is actually in numbers, which leads to a whole other conversation about Hindu and politics and all of that.
I love that. If there's anything to take away from that, it's strength in numbers. I love that. I think that's essentially what we need to do. We need to have a better Hindu or Sanatani cohesion. The more of us there are that are standing up for ourselves, the more that everyone will listen. And I guess it's also all about educating yourselves. It's about parents or guardians educating their children or the next generation. There really needs to be that sense of pride in your own way of life, which you then impart to the next generation. And I guess it's watching your channel as well and following what you do. That could be the very first step if parents nowadays are unsure of where to go. And speaking of which, Shawnji, for those who are unfamiliar with your channel or your content, for those who want to follow your work further, could you just remind our viewers about what your YouTube channel is called, any social media handles that we can follow you on?
Yes. So if you are looking for me, if you just type in hindulifestyle.ca, that URL will take you straight to my YouTube channel. Or if you're already on YouTube, if you just search for Hindu lifestyle, and lifestyle is all one word, you'll be able to find me right away. I am on Twitter. My Twitter handle is my own name, Shawn Binda. So you can find me there. On Instagram, I'm Hindu Lifestyle Official, if you search for me there. And Facebook, search for my name as well, Shawn Binda, and you can find me there. YouTube by far is where I'm probably followed the most. At last check, I think I was at about 32,000 subscribers, which is no simple feat. I mean, but it's also not as large as other YouTubers there. But I do realize that like who I'm focused on is also a smaller group. What I hope though is that in meeting people, and I actually never realized the reach of videos until you actually meet someone face to face and they start saying, "Hey, I saw your video about blah 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 blah." Like that was really good, and you actually like made me realize something. Like just a few weeks ago, there was someone who said that they saw my video that I did on the Ram Mandir inauguration, and for members of our own community, like they weren't connecting themselves as a Hindu to that inauguration of that temple. And they saw my video and they're kind of like, yes, see, like now it makes sense. And it's then I met someone else who was like, Shawn, I watch all of your videos and I make sure that my younger kids watch it as well. And they look forward to when you release. So like all of those things, so sometimes when I'm home and I'm editing and I'm doing the video, I'm like, man, I don't know if people are watching this. I don't know who's doing what, but I'm just gonna put it out there, and whatever happens, it happens. So I am grateful to people like yourself that want to interview me. Like it's such a surreal experience. I am not gonna lie. This is like I've gotten a lot of requests, and every time I receive an email saying, hey, can you like are you free to join this thing, and I'm like, why do you want to talk to me for? I'm like, but I do appreciate it. I hope to produce more content. So I have now reached out to an editor that hopefully I can now utilize more, so I can focus more on making the content, because editing is a lot of work. And as you mentioned, like one of the other issues that I found on the Hindu YouTube space is that a lot of it wasn't polished content. A lot of it is very amateurish, and I try to sort of elevate it just a little bit, so there's graphics, and things are a little bit nicer looking. So I hope I can maintain that, and hopefully now that I've brought on an editor to work with me, I can start making more. So thank you once again. Yes, so hindulifestyle.ca, and you'll find me on YouTube.
That's lovely. Thank you so much. And before we began this video, I myself said to Shawnji that I'm a fan of his work and avid follower of his content. And I came across it by chance, but I really related to it, and really a lot of it really resonated with me. And I've learned a lot as well. So you've definitely got a personal fan in me for you and for what you do. And we really appreciate what you do. Thank you so, so much. Well, that's all we have time for, sadly. I think we could go on for hours talking about everything, but life. Thank you so much. Dhanyavad to Shawnji for coming on this new podcast series. We wish you well, and we hope that you will come back to see us. I'm sure this is going to be the start of a very long journey with you, hopefully. You'll still have us. To our viewers,
Absolutely.
Dhanyavad. And thank you very much for joining us. And we will see you the next time. Take care. Namaste.